Who do you think you are? And whom am I talking to? The World Health Organization, that's who! Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is another declaration of truth from your host, Terry A. Hurlbut. The World Health Organization, that's who, will, on or about May 31st, deliver a new treaty arrogating total world sovereignty to itself. Its proponents moan that the new pandemic treaty lacks teeth and will be unenforceable, but power is as power acts. So because the Biden administration will act as if they are under force majeure, meaning under a higher force they must obey, they will use this WHO treaty as cover for their own agenda. More likely, however, what WHO says will go. So we need to ask ourselves again, who Tango Foxtrot do they think they are? I'm going to discuss it all. The Zero Draft Treaty, with what it says, what it means, the cringeworthy efforts to make us believe it's nothing, and what you can do about it. But first, I do want to shout out to the prime sponsor of this channel, which is Conservative News and Views. Link in the description. And be sure to check out the awesome CNAV Store. Scroll down near the bottom for that link. Lots of great merchandise there, especially this t-shirt that I have chosen for today, which depicts American soldiers posing in silhouette before an American flag with this caption, "Freedom isn't free." One more thing. If you like what you're about to hear, you can like this video. You can also click the bell icon to get a notice every time I come out with a new one. In fact, do you see the new icon, the heart shape with the US dollar sign in it? That's the super thanks icon. If you really want to keep these videos coming, click that and leave me a tip. Any currency will do, so long as it's legal tender. First, what does WHO have to say for itself? On 24 February, WHO published a FAQ, to which I have a link in the description, on the pandemic treaty, or actually what they call a convention, agreement, or other international instrument. An instrument, they say, is for pandemic prevention, preparedness, and response control. That very word, control, should give pause to anyone who values his liberty. The so-called pandemic of the virus that shall remain nameless was not nearly as serious as WHO claimed. Yes, that's a provocative statement, but I can back it up with a simple thought experiment. Do you remember at any time during the height of various national emergencies, seeing Diener squads pushing meat wagons down the main streets of any cities, towns, or villages, ringing handbells and shouting, "Bring out your dead," or "Traigan a sus muertos," or "Sorte vomor," or "Fate usciri I vostri morti," or "Hot eure toten raus," or "How je doden divortion," or "Vitas haski vaitje svoik mechevstvo"? No? You don't remember anything like that? Funny. Well, I thought not, but I had to ask just to be sure, because I certainly didn't see anything like that. But who would have to believe that those Diener squads did make such rows? And they must have learned much from Sol Asch of Swarthmore University. I have a link in the description to an essay on his famous conformity experiment. You see, he would usher 7 people into a room and give them a vision test. 3 lines labeled A, B, and C. One longer than the rest. Spoiler alert, it was B. As any subject might say, alone. But put him in a room with 6 other decoys, all of whom said A. And suddenly he said, "Of course it's A. Any fool can see that." In other words, Dr. Asch showed how easy it is to enforce conformity, even overriding one's perception of reality. And I, who graduated from Yale, thought Stanley Milgram had done a bad thing. I have a link in the description to an article I wrote long ago all about the Milgram Experiment and reviewing 2 key videos, Obedience by Milgram and The 10th Level, that being a made-for-TV dramatization of the Milgram Experiment filmed partly at Yale and starring William Shatner as Dr. Stephen Turner, the analog of Stanley Milgram. Let me describe the Milgram experiment for you. He would bring in two subjects for what he called an experiment on the effect of punishment on memory. Then he handed out two slips of paper, telling both men that one was marked teacher and the other learner. With that selection made, or so they thought, the teacher watched as the learner got strapped into a chair and attached to an electroshock machine. And the learner would complain that he had a bum ticker, so he was worried about all these shocks he was going to get. Then out comes the teacher, who was given this task. Read aloud 50 word pairs, then start testing the learner on his memory of them. If the learner guesses correctly, move on. If he guesses incorrectly, give him progressively higher shocks and see if he remembers any better. Sure enough, learner makes mistakes. At shock level 7, he says, "Ow!" At 8, so it's about 100 and some volts, he says louder, "Ow! Let me out of here! Let me out of here! You have no right to keep me here against my will! Let me out! Let me out! My heart's starting to bother me now!" Now, the teacher could quit and then face the experimenter, who would be telling him, "The experiment requires that you continue." Or he could go on. It's just one catch. The learner never catches on. He ends up getting 450 volts of electricity and falls silent, deathly silent. Well, whenever the teacher quits, or if it gets to that 450 volt point, the chief comes out. "We have to discontinue the experiment. We want you to know that the subject actually received no shocks whatsoever. This was to test you, the teacher, to see how you would react." And then the big reveal, the learner is all right. In fact, the teacher was the only subject. The learner is a decoy. Get it? Well, hey, Milgram nearly lost all his privileges over that one. But now, I owe him an apology. Dr. Milgram, you have nothing on Dr. Asch. Now, hold all these thoughts as I get into what WHO proposes. Here is their ostensible goal, and I quote, "The new accord could represent a global commitment to work together as an international community to help prevent disease outbreaks from impacting individuals, communities, countries, and the world the same way as the nameless pandemic did," close quote. Nonsense and other comments. Lay aside here that the pandemic didn't impact individuals, communities, countries, or the world at all. Who did it? They and their fellow travelers in most, but happily not all, countries. But now see what that organization takes upon itself and unto itself. Quote, "Importantly, any new accord would be expected to establish principles, priorities, and targets for pandemic preparedness and response with the aim to 1. Build resilience to pandemics. 2. Support prevention, detection, and responses to outbreaks with pandemic potential. 3. Ensure equitable access to pandemic countermeasures. And 4. Support global coordination through a stronger and more accountable WHO." Close quote. A more accountable WHO? Accountable to whom? Well, if it means accountable to itself, then it is accountable to no one. Elsewhere, they speak of global preparedness and response arrangements, including at the human-animal interface. Now, what can that mean? Seizing and putting down your dog or cat, using as their excuse the old bat suit theory of the virus that shall remain nameless, a theory no one with any common sense believes anymore? Let me tell everybody something. WHO makes itself about as clear as mud. Under that circumstances, I have the right, I have the duty to assume worst case. Now, before I talk about what other people are saying about this, I want to shout out to a sponsor who can really help you through the economic storms to come. That sponsor is oursilverlines.com. Do you feel like you're working harder for your money just to get by? You are not alone. The fluctuating economy, Employment issues and unexpected changes in life have left many families struggling over the past few years. Collecting gold and silver can help shield you against many of these challenges. But if you're like me many years ago, you don't know where or how to start. Our Silver Alliance helps by connecting you with thousands of members who are learning the secrets to creating and protecting true wealth by collecting precious metals. Whether you just want to collect rare and unique coins or take advantage of the business opportunities this company provides, either way, they can help you learn to live an exceptional life. Visit oursilveralliance.com to learn how you can build a legacy to your future. Now then, so what is anybody else saying? Well, also 2 months ago, the Associated Press heard some definite uh-oh signs of building popular resistance. For instance, they heard this from an Instagram poster whom they preferred not to name. Quote, Biden is about to give the China-controlled WHO power to control the United States. This will cover lockdown, supply chain surveillance, and false news, close quote. Now, the Epoch Times fortunately gave some further detail, and I have this directly from them, since I don't trust the AP any further than I could physically throw their headquarters. And no, I am not Kal-El, last son of Krypton. I quote Roman Balnikov. The Biden administration is in the process of finalizing a deal that will give the World Health Organization, WHO, near total authority to dictate America's policies during a pandemic. Once this legally binding deal goes into effect, it will give the World Health Organization, the United Nations Health Agency based in Geneva, the authority to control what U.S. policies are during a pandemic. And so, while the WHO has been, up till now, an advisory body in Europe that U.S. officials in the CDC and the FDA can turn to for advice, it would instead become the ones to actually determine which policies the United States implements, like immunization policies, lockdown policies, school closure policies, the contact tracing of U.S. citizens, and even the monitoring of online speech if that speech goes against the official narrative. Unquote Roman Balnikov. And I have a link to his video in the description. And by the way, we have already seen monitoring of online speech. Check the Twitter files. So the AP, not to let Soul Ash outdo it, published a screen that ought to have made Charles Boyer blush. You know whom I'm talking about. Charles Boyer, who plays Ingrid Bergman's unloving husband in the motion picture Gaslight. So here's what they say. Quote, false, the voluntary treaty, which is in draft form and is still far away from ratification, does not overrule any nation's ability to pass individual pandemic-related policies. Multiple experts, including one involved in the draft process, told the Associated Press. The treaty lays out broad recommendations related to international cooperation on pandemic prevention, preparedness, and response. Nowhere in the 30-page document are lockdowns, closures, or specific citizen surveillance systems mentioned. Close quote. Oh yeah? Well, hey, I have a link in the description to what they call the Zero Draft Treaty. I've looked at it from start to finish. This treaty is in fact chock full of woke catchphrases. International cooperation and obligations for states to act in accordance with international law, including to respect, protect, and promote human rights. No sovereign state lies under any obligation to cooperate with anyone. Furthermore, I saw not an ounce of respect for human rights during those lockdowns. And human rights sounds like a reference to the Human Rights Campaign, which is the world's LGBTQIA+ advocacy group. All lives have equal value and therefore equity should be a principle Well, frankly, if an equitable distribution of the jab means less of it for the United States, good. But more likely, equity sounds like something one associates today with the concepts diversity and inclusion. Central role of WHO as the directing and coordinating authority on international health work. What? Says who? Says who? Of all the arrogant, pompous statements in that treaty, that is the worst. A pandemic situation is extraordinary in nature, requiring states parties to prioritize effective and enhanced cooperation with development partners and other relevant stakeholders to address extraordinary challenges. Stakeholders? What does that mean? That's another socialistic buzzword. That's what it means. We now turn to some of its points. Point 2 speaks of a right to health. Health is something each individual has the responsibility to maintain for himself. This cannot be a right, but an allowance, for which WHO proposes to dun the already healthy. Points 4, 5, and 9 mention equity, solidarity, and inclusiveness. More woke buzzwords. Point 11, gender equality, clearly does not mean taking care of women as well as of men. It even talks about a gender-responsive / transformative approach. That has nothing to do with management of communicable disease, and everything to do with sexual reassignment through surgical mutilation and hormonal poisoning. Point 15 says it all. Universal health care. They plump for international socialized medicine. Nikita Khrushchev must be crying out, plagiat, which is how you say plagiarism in Russian. Point 16. Science and evidence-informed decisions. Well, we heard enough orders to follow the science from Anthony S. Fauci, MD. And what is this pathogen access and benefit sharing system? Why dare transport pathogens? You don't want to transport pathogens. You want to destroy them. That is, unless you're doing gain-of-function research on them. That doesn't exist yet, but under this new treaty, it will. And while this treaty does not reproduce the word LOCKDOWN, neither does it forbid it. It says only that one may not discriminate against any particular group in applying whatever measure. That's an even worse hazard of that human rights phrase. Nowhere does the document define human rights. In fact, this instrument offers no limit on the scope or power of this new pandemic governing body. It doesn't even say how one defines a pandemic. So, WHO declares a pandemic whenever it sees fit, and fitness has everything to do with gaining and keeping power. If you're a hammer, all the world is a nail, and to WHO, all the world is deathly sick with something worse than Yersinia pestis. And data squads really are pushing meat wagons down the street, ringing handbells and shouting, "Bring out your dead!" in the local language. And they're doing it because WHO says so. And what WHO says goes. Smriti Malapati, writing in Nature, seems to be doing his, or is it her, part to play the modern soul Asch. This person writes, and I quote, "A draft of the agreement highlights immunization and drug equity, but lacks teeth to enforce it." Close quote. Oh, really? Michelle Bachmann, Dean of the Pat Robertson School of Government at Regent University, would beg to differ. I have a link in the description to the interview she granted to Jan Markell of Olive Tree Ministries on this very subject. So what happens when the WHO Pandemic Convention Agreement or other international instrument gets its final vote and goes into full force and effect? First, and this need not wait, but can happen now. Call your senators and representatives. Let their staff know you vote no to any such instrument, however WHO wishes to call it. Let your senators especially know that this is a treaty, and you expect the Senate to pass judgment on it. and of course that you expect your senators to vote nay. Tell your representative, too, that the House needs to pass a resolution demanding Senate action. Second, the minute this administration takes or threatens any action in obedience to or compliance with who or its designated ruling agency, call your lawyer. I recommend Alliance Defending Freedom. They are the JAG Corps of the American Patriotic Militia, or at least one element of it. The other two are the American Center for Law and Justice and Judicial Watch. I have links in the description to where you can reach all three. These organizations need two things from you. One is financial assistance, as much as you can provide. And the other thing, full particulars of any harms you have suffered or are about to suffer at the hand of this administration in ostensible obedience to this treaty. This will call for that particular form of warfare called lawfare. The law gives us the tools to fight this instrument, as they call it. We must use them. And third, but the need for that will depend on the success or failure of the first two. Links to the description of the article, to the WHO fact, to the description of the Asch Experiment, to my own description of the Milgram Experiment, and to that William Shatner TV movie, to Roman Balnikov's commentary, to the Zero Draft Treaty, to Michelle Bachmann and Jan Markell's interview, to where you can reach Alliance Defending Freedom, American Center for Law and Justice, and Judicial Watch, to my Declarations of Truth Twitter account and to Conservative News and Views. I've also left links in the description to the awesome CNAV Store and to ourcivilized.com. As I also mentioned, you know already about how to like a video, turn on notifications, and leave a tip. On the end screen, I'm going to leave a subscribe link to my channel and links to Roman Balnikov's commentary, Michelle Bachmann's interview, and the Stanley Milgram's obedience video. This is Terry A. Hurlbut delivering another declaration of truth and reminding you to let the truth set you free.